Inspired Pilot Podcast, Episode 4.
In the event of a dire emergency, stop and wind the clock. In other words, don't react immediately. Stop, slow down, see what's going on, and then deal with it.
Welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast with your host, Marvin Robinson. Inspiring stories from inspiring pilots from around the world.
Okay, welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast. This is Marvin Robinson. Let's get started. I'm very happy to introduce today's featured inspiring pilot, Timothy Nathan. Welcome, Timothy. Are you ready to inspire today?
I can only do my best.
Fantastic. Timothy Nathan started flying training when he was 14, initially funding it through washing cars. He went on through the University Air Squadron to a private instrument-rated pilot, and then climbed the professional ladder from night mail flights to even flying the former UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. After losing his job in the 1993 recession, he returned to private flying. Timothy has a Piper Aztec, which he flies to silly, mainly cold places, is an instrument-rated instructor, and lobbies extensively for General Aviation. Okay, I've given the listeners, the inspired pilots, just a little overview, Timothy. We'll go into your journey later on so we can get to know you a little bit more. Take a minute, tell us a little bit about yourself personally, where you're from, and briefly what you're doing aviation-wise now.
Okay, well, in terms of where I'm from, I've always been a southwest London boy. I was born in Epsom and I still live in Epsom, though I have been many other places in between. My occupation at the moment is that I have a software company, but I only started that after I lost my my flying job in the early 90s. And what I'm doing now, well, I have this Piper Aztec that I fly as much as I can, but I actually spend a lot more time flying in other people's aeroplanes, teaching mainly instrument ratings, though I do some multi-engine stuff, multi-engine ratings and so on. So that's sort of where I am now.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so obviously, just from that brief bio, you sound like you've had definitely an extensive career.
Well, I've done a little bit of everything. I've done some gliding, I've done light piston singles, I've done private twins, I've done a bit in the military, aerobatics, I've done commercial light twins, executive jets, a little bit of helicopters, microlights, a little bit of gyrocopters, balloons. So I've sort of got something different out of each thing. I don't go along. There are some people who say, I fly a cub out of small grass fields and that's the only thing worth doing. But I'm the other way around. I just love all kinds of aviation. Apart from parachuting, I've got no desire to do. I've tried a little bit of everything. There's lots of other things I want to do. I want to do bush flying. I'd like to fly seaplanes. I'd like to try glider tagging. There's lots more things I'd like to do. But I do feel that I've sort of had at least a little go at everything, which is brilliant.
It definitely sounds like you're at least 3/4 of the way through the whole of the aviation bucket list in total. Basically, your journey, is very extensive, but every journey has to start somewhere. Tell us the story, Timothy, of how you first got involved with flying and wanting to be a pilot.
Well, how I've wanted to be a pilot for absolutely as long as I can remember. And I can only assume it goes back to a very early childhood experience. Apparently, I don't remember this. My parents tell me that as a toddler, we flew out to Guernsey on holiday, and I was absolutely terrified of the aeroplane. I must have been 2 or 3 or something at the time. And they thought at the time that they didn't want to make me frightened of flying for the rest of my life. So they obviously did stuff to G me into flying. And I know one of the things they did was we took a little flight from Guernsey to probably Alderney, I'm not sure. And I think they must have sort of said things and done things. I don't know what it was, but for as long as I can remember, all I wanted to do was fly aeroplanes. And I really got my first opportunity. I was at school in Peterborough, or near Peterborough, and I used to go every Sunday down to Sibson and initially just sort of sit there and look at the aeroplanes and drool. But then, as happens with young kids hanging around airfields, I would hold ladders while people changed their lights, and that turned into them taking me for little flights and so on. And that turned me on to wanting to learn to fly myself. And I should have got my logbook out, but it was certainly when I was when I was 14, though I can't remember how far into my of being 14, I just started going out and making a bit of extra money by, as you said in your introduction, washing cars and washing windows and so on, and just building up until, and this is going to make some of your listeners weep, until I had £3. And when I had £3, that was enough to do half an hour's flight. It was £6 an hour when I started in a Cessna 150. So I would just, wash 6 cars at 50p a piece, and I'd turn up with my £3 and buy half an hour's flight. And I did that for probably two or 3 years, over which time I'd built up very little time, maybe 10 hours or something. But at that point, my dad looked at this and he saw that I was, that this wasn't a passing fancy, that I was really putting my back into it. And he gave me the rest of the money necessary at that time to get my license. And in those days, I know it's different now, but in those days, you couldn't go solo until you were 17. So I went solo pretty much on my 17th birthday, and I had my license about 6 weeks after my 17th birthday. So, it was a fun and early start.
Fantastic. I think that £3 there, I think most people in a single anyway, that they literally throw £3 worth of fuel away when they test their fuel in the pre-flight.
Yeah. Well, but everything's changed. I mean, in those days, £3,000 a year was a good professional salary. So it's just inflation.
Okay, so you're 17 years old. How many hours was it to complete the license? Was it still 45 or had it changed?
No, I think it was 40 in those days. I think it was 35 if you did a course. Of course, this was pre-JAA. This was just back in the good old CAA days. And I'm fairly sure that it was 35 if you did an approved course, which of course I didn't, and 40 hours if you didn't.
Fantastic. Okay, so take us back to that initial training then, for the benefit of the listeners. What did you find challenging and how did you overcome this? This is during your initial training.
Well, I didn't actually find the flying training challenging. What I did find challenging, and I suppose I better not name names, but my first instructor, who did most of the first 10 or 15 hours of my flying, he was a very strange man, and he had the habit of beating his dog if I flew badly. And
beating his dog.
He had a little black dog that he had in the back of his car, and it wasn't so much, Timothy's flown badly, I'm going to go and beat the dog.
Yeah.
But if I flew badly and that annoyed him, then the next thing I would see would be that he was beating this dog and telling it to shut up. And he probably didn't even connect the two, but of course, as a 14, 15-year-old, it was highly traumatic and actually did have the effect of making me not to want to make any mistakes. So I suppose it was helpful, but it was highly traumatic. And I know there are other people who were trained by, I've spoken to other people who are trained by the same guy, and They tell the same story, so it wasn't just me. But that was probably the biggest challenge in those early days. I bet you haven't heard that one on your blog before.
I wasn't expecting that at all, and I'm sure that dog loved you in the end. Okay, so you overcome that challenge by flying correctly and as the instructor.
I guess so.
In terms of aircraft types, how many different aircraft types have you flown to date? And, what is your favorite aircraft? What do you hold close to your heart?
I honestly have no idea how many aircraft types I've flown. I've flown pretty well all of the, the ones that you see hanging around a GA airfield. I've at least had a go in most of them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even be able to guess. I've even flown a Spitfire on one occasion, so it's been a fair number. What do I hold the closest to my heart? Did you say?
That's correct.
Well, it has to be the Aztec. I mean, I've owned an Aztec for half of its life and a third of mine. And it's just so safe and so flexible, and you just can't do anything. You can you can really abuse it and it doesn't bite back, and yet you can put it into grass fields, but you can also take it on airways, you can go on long trips. So I think I'd probably have to say the Aztec, but there have been so many other aeroplanes that I've equally loved, and a few that I've quite hated, but I think it's got to be the Aztec.
Aztec, fantastic. Okay, well, let's touch on that slightly then. What do you hate? What aircraft did you find not so lovely?
Well, again, your listeners are going to be very disappointed by this one. The aeroplane I least liked of every aeroplane I've flown was the Tiger Moth. And I know they're romantic, and I know they're beautiful, and I know they evoke everything about the golden age of flying.
The imagination, yeah.
Yeah, but to fly them, they are pigs. Absolute pigs. In my humble opinion.
That's it. You've heard it there. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so let's go into your journey now. So you mentioned that you went from the University Air Squadron to a private instrument-rated pilot. What made you get the instrument rating as a private pilot initially?
Well, things have changed. In those days, it was just the next step. I mean, there I was, a young person, really wanting to develop my flying. It was just the obvious thing to do. It was the next step. I'd done my IMCR, I'd done my night rating. I'd been through the University Air Squadron and done aerobatics and all the other things that military types do. And it was just the obvious next thing to do. It almost wasn't a thought process. It was just the next step on the ladder.
The next step. Okay. And what about when you climbed onto the professional ladder? Was that just a next step, a logical next step from the private IR?
Well, it wasn't quite as simple as that. By that stage, I was working in the city as a management consultant, and I was earning stupid amounts of money. This is going back to the 80s now. You remember the Porsches, and you're probably too young to remember.
I remember the Porsches, the phones, yeah.
the red braces, and so on. And those are the days where you could make stupid amounts of money for not doing very much. But I just hated what I was doing. It wasn't so much I hated. I didn't hate the work, but I didn't believe in what I was doing. I was having to say things to people that I didn't believe and I didn't think were in their best interests. And every day that I did it, I thought, I really don't want to be doing this. And I thought, right, that's it. I've now made quite a lot of money. I'm going to spend a proportion of that money getting my professional. But by this time, I can't remember what the number was, either 700 or 800 hours you needed to get what in those days was called a self-improver commercial pilot's license, which meant that you didn't have to go through a course. If you had whatever the requisite number was, I say 700 or 800 hours, yeah. You could just take the test without doing a course. And I had that by that stage because in the meantime, with all this silly money I'd been earning, I'd bought an 𝗂𝗃, a Tiger, and I'd flown it all over Europe. I'd flown it out to Israel. I'd flown it to Eastern Europe, all sorts of stuff. And in fact, for a period when I decided I wanted to be a professional pilot, every night after work, it was based in Stansted. There's another gosh for you. Yes, it was my 𝗂𝗃 was based in Stansted. And every night I would fly this aeroplane as slowly as it would possibly go, because I was after the hours, not to get anywhere. Yeah. And I'd fly at a minimum speed to Ostend, where in those days the fuel was amazingly cheap. Refuel, fly up along the coast to sort of Boulogne or thereabouts, fly up across Kent, land back at Stansted, and then go home. And I used to do this literally every night. So it was about 2 hours flying every night. So I was able to build up the last remaining hours to my, as I say, 700 or 800, whatever it was, and went on and did my multi-IR and my CPL, simply because I decided that I didn't want to be working in the city anymore. I wanted to be a pilot. And this was about the time that I met my wife. So my wife had become attracted to someone who was earning stupid amounts of money, and I then took a job at 15% of what I'd been earning before, which bless her, she took in her stride, because I was very happy, and my first job was night newspapers across the North Sea. So I'd go across to, I think it was Schiphol, I think it was Amsterdam, every night, taking the British newspapers in the back of an Aztec across the North Sea in whatever the weather had to throw at me, and it was great fun. It was always through the night, which didn't please my wife very much either. And I don't know how many times I did it, but maybe between 50 and 100 times I probably did this run. Yeah. And I don't think I once brought that Aztec back without a technical defect. On one occasion, the technical defect was one of the alternators rolling around in the bottom of the cowling. That was a fairly extreme one, but there was always something wrong with that aeroplane. So there was always something to deal with. Yeah, it was a fun time, and I built up a lot of experience over that.
That sounds really interesting. I love the way that, after work, some people, go home, go to the gym, maybe relax or watch a bit of TV. Meanwhile, Timothy is down at Stansted picking up his aircraft, doing a little jolly around Europe and back again, just in time for bed. Perfect.
Yeah, that was the way. Well, as far as I remember, it wasn't even in time for bed. It was in time for supper. I would finish work at whatever it was, maybe get to Stansted at about 6, and I'd be back again by 8, home for supper. I mean, this was every night. I'd sort of got it off to a T.
Perfect. Is this where the love of the Aztec grew then? Your relationship with this Aztec going across the North Sea?
No, I would say, if anything, that could have put me off the Aztec, because, as I say, every night something else was wrong with it. But they were very beaten up old Aztecs belonging to this charter company that was barely getting by. And if the Aztec is properly maintained, it's great. But these were not properly maintained aircraft. So no, I can't say I fell in love with the Aztec then. No.
Fantastic. You mentioned that you were earning 15% of what you're earning, so definitely love prevails, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, as my wife even says now, I was never happier than when I was being called at 10:30 at night, being told, get down to Southend in the next hour, you've got a shipment out to Europe, whatever. And most people would think that was not the ideal way to run your life. As far as I was concerned, it was the ideal way to run my life. I just loved it.
I'm smiling now. I can actually imagine. And I think I'm with you with this one. We mentioned in the bio as well that you flew the former UK Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. That sounds interesting. Tell us that story.
Well, to fill in the chronology, I went from the Aztecs over the North Sea to air taxi in Chieftains, and then air charter in Cessna 404s, and then onto the HS-125, which is a medium business jet. And we used to do all sorts of stuff in that. We used to take pop stars, air ambulance, freight, did an amazing journey around Russia, went into Yugoslavia when Lord Carrington was trying to sort out the Yugoslavians just before the terrible conflict. I was one of the pilots flying him in and so on. Anyway, so lots of VVIP stuff and a lot of government ministers. And, one on several occasions, I don't know exactly how many, the government minister to be carried around was Mrs. Thatcher. And though it really galls me to say so, I mean, I found Mrs. Thatcher's politics execrable. I was one of those people chanting "the witch is dead," but I have to say that in person she was utterly charming. She couldn't have been more charming than she was. She was like an absolutely everyone's favourite aunt. That's how, and she always remembered our names. She remembered our children's names. She would always greet us. I mean, she must have met so many people, but she was always absolutely charming and very ordinary, very approachable, very, just as I say, just like your aunt. So no, it was an interesting experience, but it was in among lots of other
It's just
VIPs,
one of many.
One of many. And in fact, during that period, I probably flew most of the cabinet at one time or another. It's just, if you're chartering out executive jets, you clearly get the rich and famous getting in the back. That tends to be it. Well,
I'm sure the Iron Lady tag still existed in Downing Street. You mentioned that you had some jet time in the HS-125. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Is that the only jet you've flown?
Yeah. Well, it's the only one I've flown any amount. I mean, I've played around in others, but the only one I've got sort of lots of hours on is the HS-125. I think I don't know, there's so many stories to tell. I think probably the most interesting one was in the closing days of the Soviet Union. The European commissioners wanted to go out and meet the people who were likely to be the leaders of what were going to be self-determining states. I mean, this was still Soviet Union, but it was fairly clear that places like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan were going to be separate states, and the EU wanted to make sure they were in there having negotiations with them and so on.
Doing the homework, yeah.
Yeah, and we literally, two of us, two pilots and an air hostess, had a whole load of dollars stuck in our top pockets, and we were told, take these European commissioners to every capital of the Soviet Union states and come back when you're done. Which, I mean, in these days, that wouldn't count for much. But in those days, the Soviet Union was a completely closed place. I mean, people went to Moscow and they went to St. Petersburg, but they didn't go to Ashgabat and Almaty and Tashkent. And so it was quite a daunting prospect to it would be a little bit like going to North Korea these days. It was that kind of feeling to it, or Burma as it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So it's quite daunting, but actually it turned out to be just the most wonderful experience. It was because, of course, what would happen is that we would go to each of these places and the commissioners would go off to have their meetings and we would be free. And in some countries, we would literally just be told, here's your hotel room, we'll see you in a couple of days.
Yeah.
In other places, we were told, here's your car, here's your driver, tell them where you want to go, tell them what you want to see. So it was just like, a month-long paid holiday where we worked, if you can call flying an airplane work.
Agree, yeah.
We worked for maybe an hour a day as we flew from one capital to the other, and the rest of it was just going around seeing these fascinating, fabulous places, some of which were still in the Middle Ages. I mean, places with open sewers down the streets and wild animals, not wild animals, domestic animals in people's houses, which only had curtains across the windows, no glass. I mean, that kind of medieval kind of thing we found in some places. Other places we found amazingly more civilized and beautiful than we expected, like Almaty, for example.
Yeah.
So it was a fascinating month, I suppose it was, by the time we came back.
So as English pilots as you were, how were you received in those places? How were you received? Like, you were like a stranger. You must have been like wow, who the hell is that?
Yeah, well, no, I think we were taken in the funniest story was in a place, now what was it called? 𝗟𝗏𝗡𝗏. And 𝗟𝗏𝗡𝗏 is right in the middle of the steppes of Siberia. I think actually it's technically just inside Kazakhstan, but it's in the sort of the Kazakhstan-Russia border, absolutely in the middle of nowhere. And we had to go there to refuel. And again, we went there with a certain amount of trepidation, and on the approach, we could see that there were wild horses on the runway. This is to give you an idea of what this place was like. And we actually had to do a low pass along the runway to get the wild horses out of the way. And then we came back and landed. And we were thinking, how are we going to even tell them why we're here? And I lowered the door, and this guy comes along in the full Soviet uniform with the high peaked cap, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And he comes up the steps and he says, "Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is 𝗟𝗍𝗽𝗍. I'll be looking after you while you're here. If there's anything I can do to help..."
As clear as that.
As clear as that. And it turned out that he had learnt air traffic controlling in I think it was Bournemouth in those days. Anyway, wherever the air traffic control college was. He'd come over to England. He'd learned to be an air traffic controller. He was the guy that spoke English, and he spoke absolutely crystal clear English.
And he was in the full Soviet Union regalia.
Yeah, absolutely, the whole lot. Yeah, so that was an interesting and fun story.
Fantastic.
I guess the other obvious story from those days was going into Yugoslavia with Lord Carrington, because he was meeting all the 𝗟𝗍𝗃, the 𝗘𝗽𝗏𝗃s and Milosevic's and so on. And I can't, in something that's going to be published, say some of the things that he said when he got back on board the aeroplane. But sometime over a drink, I'll tell you. It was just fascinating to hear his insight of what it was like negotiating with these guys. And of course, I won't say we met them, but we were at the top of the stairs while they were at the bottom, and of course, then it all kicked off, and Lord Carrington had failed, but he made a valiant attempt at it.
And you contributed to his efforts in some small way.
Well, the small way was to say to him, "I'm sure if anyone can sort this out, sir, you can." It was very, very smarmy. That's why they employed me.
Patting him on his back in a sort of derogatory kind of way. Fantastic. Okay, so you mentioned cold places, and in the chat just before the interview, you mentioned that you visited the North Pole. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, well, that was much later. That was only a few years ago. What had happened was a couple of years earlier, a group of us had flown not really in formation, but same way, same day, out to Svalbard, Spitsbergen, which I'm sure you know, but for your listeners who don't know, that's the island that sits halfway between the north coast of Norway and the North Pole. So if you look on an atlas, you'll see it up there.
It's within the Arctic Circle, yeah?
Oh, well within the Arctic Circle, yes. Yeah. The Arctic Circle actually crosses Norway. This is hundreds of miles north of the Arctic Circle. And Svalbard is an amazing place. It's about the size of England, and it's got something like 2,000 inhabitants. It's just the most wild, barren place you can imagine. Anyway, a group of us went up there just because it was there, and we were sitting in a bar, and in marquetry, on this bar top was a map of the world seen from the North Pole. So, you can see the north coast of Russia, and you can see the north coast of Canada and northern Norway and so on. And one of the guys made a chance remark. Just looking at this, he said, "Do you realize that we're actually closer to Canada than we are to home?" And, a few more remarks, then we went back to talking about the beer or whatever it was. Yeah. And but that sort of thought just stuck in my mind. And I thought, it is conceivable that one could go up to Svalbard and then fly across to Canada. And to cut a long story short, that's what I did. I flew up through Norway up to Svalbard, up to both the geographical North Pole and then the magnetic North Pole, because as I'm sure you know, they're a long way apart. Yeah. Down into Canada, a place called 𝗬𝗏𝗃, down to Resolute Bay, which is sort of the northernmost. 𝗬𝗏𝗃 is a scientific station. The northernmost occupied place is a place called Resolute, where I picked up a young girl. That's another story. So I'd been solo up to that point, and then I brought this girl. This girl had got stuck in the Arctic for reasons, again, I won't go into, but she was stuck without transport. Okay. And she lived by Victoria Station, which is like 20 minutes away from Bromley, which is the station that serves Biggin Hill, where I was going back to. And it just seemed daft not to take her back. So I went out solo, came back dual, as it were. Back over Greenland and Iceland. It was a wonderful experience.
And was that in the Aztec as well?
That was in the Aztec, yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. Basically, it sounds like you've got a massive history there. I'm sure we could talk forever and ever. Let's move forward to sort of now. Obviously, you've mentioned the Aztec that you own. What are you doing flying-wise now? What are you excited about right now?
Well, the next big thing, I mean, it's not such a big thing, but it's great fun, is that on the 20th of March, there's a full eclipse going, unfortunately, not over mainland of the UK, but over the Faroe Islands. And my son, the following week, is getting married to his astronomer fiance. And he's a physicist as well, so he's into this stuff. And they said, "Hey, could we go and see this eclipse, please?" So we're setting off for the Faroes, and the idea is that if the weather is clear, we'll stay on the ground in the Faroes and watch it from there.
Yep.
But if the weather isn't clear, we'll hopefully climb up through the bad weather and get on top and see the eclipse from there. So it's going to be something like 15 hours of flying for the sake of 2 minutes 45 seconds of solar eclipse. But my feeling is that if you've got the aeroplane and if people want to do things, I'm actually game for anything. If people say to me, take me to such and such place. Yesterday, I took a mate down to. It was in his aeroplane, but he's in business with his son, and he doesn't like to fly because the two of them run the business. He doesn't like to fly with his son in a light aeroplane, just the two of them, because he's got all his employees to think about. So I just go along and act as, I don't know what you call it, co-pilot, safety pilot, second pilot, whatever. There's so much, but most of what I do, I mean, for example, I think almost every day this week and almost every day next week, I'm doing instrument rating training on people's own aeroplanes, which is also great fun because I get to see, again, an awful lot of different kinds of aeroplanes. Today I was in a 𝗣𝗶𝗍𝗃. A couple of days ago I was in a Mooney. People have all sorts of different aircraft that I can get up and have a go in. So that's all great fun as well.
The trip to the Faroe Islands sounds a little bit like that getting called at 10 o'clock at night when you were in bed with your wife and you'll get sent out. Any excuse, anytime, anywhere, 𝗚𝗏𝗎's flying.
Yeah, and there's a little bit more planning on this occasion, but it's as you say, it's just another fun thing to do. I'm always, and if any of your listeners can think of something fun to do in an aeroplane, I'm game.
That sounds like a challenge. You mentioned, you said you're doing all this fun stuff with the Aztec. Can you tell us the benefits of owning an aircraft rather than a share or renting at a club?
Well, actually, at the moment, I am in a share. When I first got the aircraft, I was in a share. Then I owned it on my own for quite a number of years. And then for one reason or another, I had an engine collapse, completely blow up in flight. And so I had to replace both engines. And rather than just replace them with new engines, I decided to combine it with another Aztec. So I'm in a share with the guy who used to own that Aztec. The benefits of ownership are obviously, availability is obviously the big one. But I think almost more important than that is knowing exactly what's happened to the aircraft. Knowing, first of all, what state you're going to find it in, but also knowing that the maintenance has been done properly, knowing exactly how all the equipment works. I mean, I've had the same aeroplane for 20 years, and I don't think it's got any more surprises to throw at me now. I pretty much know how every system works and so on. And I go up with people who rent, and they are religiously reading off checklists, which of course is the right thing to do, particularly in an aeroplane you're not particularly familiar with. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, but if they get a serious emergency, which maybe isn't in the checklist, are they really going to know what to do? Do they know how the emergency gear lowering works? Do they know how, if the alternator goes off, how long they've got, what systems they have to take offline, and all sorts of stuff? Do they know what every button on the GPS does? So I think really it's knowing your aeroplane is the real advantage of having your own.
That's very useful. Thanks for that. You mentioned also earlier, well, I mentioned in your bio that you lobby for General Aviation. Can you expand on this a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is something I've got into more over the last few years. Basically, I'm with two groups. I'm with 𝗂𝗶𝗹𝗆, where I do less, and with PPLIR, which is the group that lobbies for the rights of IFR pilots now in Europe. It used to be in the UK, but now it's all EASA is in Europe. And it's just most of what I do is just turn up to meetings and remind people we exist, because mostly people don't want to, I mean, there's no agenda to stop light aviation or light aviation in the airways or so on. The trouble is that the agenda is about making things better for commercial air transport and for the military and so on. Yeah. And so someone needs to be there, not to really push the case, but just to remind them that we also exist. So when they say, oh, well, let's have this new bit of equipment fitted, it only costs £100,000 and it only weighs 30 kilograms, we can all put those in our airliners, can't we? And I'm saying, oh, sorry, excuse me, there are those of us who've got Piper Cherokees that we fly on airways, and the maximum that we could put in our aircraft is another 500 grams, and it can't cost more than £3,000. How are you going to make your new system work with us? And they say, oh yeah, sorry, yes, we must work that out. So as I say, there's no agenda against us, but we get forgotten about. The Olympics is an example of that. I lobbied very, very hard to get the, I don't know if you remember, but originally the Olympics was going to be 3 months of no fly. And we got it down to, I think, 6 weeks, I can't remember, of actually being able to do pretty much what we wanted, providing we followed their guidelines.
And what organisation was that through? Was that through the 𝗂𝗶𝗹𝗆?
Actually, that particular one, I was pretty much, I won't say I was on my own, because 𝗂𝗶𝗹𝗆 was doing a vast amount, PPLIR was doing a vast amount. Yeah. Actually, I think that a lot of the success on that was I put together a small group of people from across the GA community, and we agreed to fund counsel for a judicial review of the decision to have this 3-month ban. And I think when we made it clear to the Department of Transport that we would be challenging the ruling as a judicial review, and that the effect would be that they would have nothing, because if the judicial review said, no, those plans are too restrictive, they could end up with no plans at all. So I sounds like I'm being big-headed.
Very strategic.
But it was it was a strategic go at making them rethink what they were going to do. And so I sound like I'm putting a big feather in my cap. Lots of other people were involved in that, but I think it was probably the thing that I can be most proud of in my lobbying. But I've been very heavily involved in the new instrument rating and loads of other stuff. I don't know where to begin. I have a good relationship with 𝗘𝗽𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗀, and I write papers for him and tend to have a go at him at various things. I remind him that S is supposed to stand for safety, and therefore doing things that are counter safety, as both EASA and the CAA sometimes do for bureaucratic reasons, is not a good idea, and so on. It's just lobbying. I just go to a lot of meetings, most of which are incredibly boring, and I just, when something comes up that needs me to say, hold on, what about us? I'm just there to do it.
You're definitely that voice, and so I definitely appreciate what you did for the Olympics, and obviously ongoing as well.
Yeah, I'm the main PPLIR. No, that's not quite true. There's about 2 or 3 of us at PPLIR who attend a lot of meetings. I do most of the UK ones, and there's a guy called Julian Scarf who does most of the European ones, and just try and remind people that what we need.
Sounds like a great plan and a great cause. Okay, so moving on now. Let's move into your proudest flying moment. I'm sure this is going to be exceedingly difficult. What is your proudest flying moment so far? Tell us that story.
Well, I don't know about proudest. I mean, probably my first jet command was a very proud moment. Every year that I do Project Propeller, and any one of your listeners that doesn't know what Project Propeller is, put this on pause, go onto the Project Propeller website, see what it is. It's just the most wonderful thing with Second World War aircrew. Also, flying with the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, I once spent a day leading a formation of Spitfires and Hurricanes around with Geoffrey Wellham and Bob Foster in the back, because we had the aeroplanes that they had actually flown during the Second World War, during the Battle of Britain, formating on us. I don't know. I don't know.
What aircraft were you in then?
I was in the Aztec.
So the Aztec is there, and you're getting formated on by some of the Battle of Britain aircraft.
Two Hurricanes, two Spitfires. Yes,
fantastic.
If you want, I don't know.
Give me a moment. Give me one moment, Timothy. Put your stake in the ground. What's your proudest flying moment to date?
Oh, it has to be the North Pole, probably.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, in terms of future plans, and what are your future plans and aspirations?
I think it's probably easier to talk about aspirations than plans, because I do have a couple of aspirations, but I also have to be honest with myself and say, am I really ever going to do them? But I mean, one of the things I'd like to do is go around the world at 80 North. And that means going along the north coast of Russia, the north coast of Alaska and Canada and Svalbard. So literally going round the world at that level. I'd love to do that.
How many miles is that? Have you worked it out yet?
I haven't worked it out. It's
doable, right?
Is it
doable?
It's 20. Is it 24,000 sine 80? I'm sure your listeners can work that out.
Yeah.
Or is it sine 10? Whichever it is, whichever is the smaller. But I haven't worked it out. But the difficulty would be getting hold of avgas. So I might have to do it in a paraffin burner, but then that's much less fun. I'd love to do round the world north to south. Because I think you asked earlier about other inspiring pilots, and 𝗂𝗍𝗄𝗏 Thatcher has got to be the greatest of them all. And she's done that north to south around the world, and I would just love to do that. Or just go over the South Pole, which is much more challenging than the North Pole.
I definitely like the idea of that north to south around the world. You're going to see everything in terms of climate, countries, population, culture. Wow, that would be awesome.
Yeah, it'd be great. I'd love it. But where I mean, I'm now in my late 50s. Am I ever going to do it really? I don't know.
I reckon you should try a bit harder, and I reckon you can do this.
You're going to sponsor me from the advertising on your blog site, are you? Okay, thank you. I accept.
Roger. Okay, Timothy, we've now reached my favourite part of the show, which is the quick fire checklist.
All right, okay.
This is where I ask you a series of questions and you come back to us, the inspired pilots, with amazing and inspiring answers. How does that sound?
I don't know about amazing and inspiring. Let's hear what the questions are. Let's see what we can do.
Let's go. Okay, what is the best piece of aviation-related advice you've ever received?
I think in the event of a dire emergency, stop and wind the clock. In other words, don't react immediately. Stop, slow down, see what's going on, and then deal with it. I think that's the best bit of advice for anyone. Sounds very good.
Do you have a favourite internet flying resource that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Yes, unfortunately, it's a closed forum. Let's say it's only open to members, and that's the PPLIR forum. It is so full of measured, professional people, very high-grade individuals, and there's none of the ill will and misbehaviour that you see on so many forums. Everything is, just colleagues talking with each other, and the level of detail and detailed knowledge that's on there beggars belief. And I honestly believe that in that forum, we know much more about general aviation IFR flying than anyone in the CAA, anyone in EASA, and they come to us for advice. It is quite an inspiring place.
Okay, we'll make sure that's in the show notes on your show notes page.
Brilliant.
Okay, can you share one of your personal habits that you believe contributes to your flying success?
I think probably not taking no for an answer. That so often you think of a project and someone will tell you it's impossible, and I think it's not just accepting that it's impossible, but there will be a way to do it. The greatest inspiration of that, of course, is Nathan Doidge. And again, if your listeners don't know who Nathan Doidge is, they should look him up on YouTube. This guy who is extremely disabled and yet has got his full unrestricted flying license. And if he can do it, anyone can. So if you decide to do something, find a way, make your own luck, I would say.
That sounds like sound advice. And I think if we apply that to one of your aspirations, I think you're going to make it. Okay, next question. Trikes or tail draggers?
Trikes or tail draggers? Well, obviously it's horses for courses, but there's a very good reason why in the early 1940s most aircraft changed from being trikes from being tail draggers to trikes. Trikes can operate in much more extreme conditions, particularly wind conditions. I will land my Aztec in a 40-knot crosswind, and I have operated in a 65-knot headwind on the runway. And there's no way you can do that kind of thing in a tail dragger. But of course, if you're operating on short grass strips, places where you would dig in the nose wheel of a trike, obviously tail draggers are better. I mean, tail draggers have some obvious advantages in some circumstances, but overall, for getting a mission completed, it's got to be trikes every time, I'm afraid. I know that's not going to be popular among some of your listeners, but that's my view.
I love hearing the different opinions on this one. Can you recommend one aviation-related book and why?
Has it got to be one? Can I give you two?
No, unfortunately, just the one.
Oh, well, if it's got to be one, then it's 𝗏𝗂𝗏𝗏 by Ernest Gann. It just summarizes all the romanticism of my kind of aviation. It's about flying DC-3s and DC-4s in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and it's just a wonderful book. But I'm going to very quickly say First Light as well.
First Light. I think I'm actually going to have to change this question to, can you recommend an aviation book that isn't 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏? I think that's the way forward from now on.
Right, okay, well then it's got to be First Light, because it's the best description of learning to fly I've ever read.
Okay, we'll also link to that in the show notes. Okay, next question. What is your favorite non-essential but essential to you technology gadget in your cockpit?
I'm afraid, boringly, I'm just going to say the iPad. The iPad with SkyDemon. SkyDemon is one of the best things to happen to aviation for many, many years. And I actually have no paper in my cockpit at all. There is a POH somewhere in a pocket, but there's no paper in there at all. Everything's on the iPad, and of course backups. I mean, I have another tablet, in fact, an Android tablet with me, so that if there were even a general iOS problem, I've got an Android backup. But no, it's definitely it's iPad and SkyDemon every time.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Okay, this is my favorite question now. So, if you had a time machine and you could go back and meet your younger self just as you're about to start your flying journey, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, I've got a slightly naughty story, which is not from the start of my flying career, but in fact, towards the end of my professional career. I wish I had slept with that senior cabin attendant, because if I had, she wouldn't have then gone and told lies about me and got me fired from my second jet job. And she was actually quite attractive, but I had a young family and new wife and so on. It just wasn't the time. But if only I had done what she wanted, then I would probably still be flying executive jets today.
That definitely is a little bit naughty, and I think you made the right decision. And let's park that one. Okay, Inspired Pilots, you can find all the links to all the resources and everything else we've been talking about in today's episode by going to inspiredpilot.com and search for Timothy in the search bar to find the show notes for this episode. Okay, Timothy, I've really enjoyed listening to your journey. I'm sure we could go on and you can tell a million other stories. And everything you said is and has been very inspiring. Last piece of guidance. Could you give us one last piece of guidance for our audience of Inspired Pilots? Share how people can get in contact with you, and then we'll sign off.
Okay. Last bit of guidance. I think it's got to be learned continuously. I think the time when you think that you've learned enough and you've become, when you think you've learned enough, that's the time you should stop, because you've become super dangerous and you should stop. If you always think that you're learning, then keep going. And how people can get in touch with me, well, I'm very happy for people to email me. It's timothy@tdn, that's Tango Delta November .email, or you can find me on Facebook, or of course in PPLIR.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being so generous with your time. On behalf of the Inspired Pilots, thank you, and speak to you again.
It's been my pleasure. I wish the project every success.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Inspired Pilot podcast. Don't forget to head over to inspiredpilot.com. That's where you'll find the show notes for every episode, links to all the resources mentioned, and much, much more. Wherever you are on your pilot journey, get ready to be inspired.